So I have sat down to make this video maybe like 5 times in the last 2 or 3 years, and every time I sit down to record it, I chicken out. I get so nervous about sharing this because it feels really vulnerable to talk about this in general, but especially on the internet. But October is AVM Awareness Month every year. And this year I've decided that I am going to share my own story, living with a pulmonary AVM and my health journey, because this condition is one that has such little awareness around it. There's not a lot of knowledge, just generally, about this condition and the signs and symptoms and what life is like for people living with this condition. So if me sharing my experience can help to raise even the tiniest bit of awareness, then something really positive will have come out of my experience. And also I know what it's like to live with a very rare condition, and it can sometimes feel a bit isolating. And so and I know that for me, seeing people's stories where they're sharing their life with an AVM or their life with a rare condition was comforting and helpful. And if me sharing my experience can be helpful and make somebody else feel a little bit less isolated and lonely, then again, something really positive will have come out of this. So I was born with something called a pulmonary AVM. Pulmonary just means lungs, like pulmonary system, and an AVM is an arteriovenous malformation. For me, I had a pulmonary AVM in my right lung. An AVM, generally, an arteriovenous malformation, is a complex and abnormal connection between your arteries and your veins in a particular area of the body. Typically, you have capillaries to connect the blood that goes through veins into the blood that goes through arteries, because one is like much faster flowing and higher pressure than the other. I think. Somebody correct me on the science if I'm wrong. If you have an AVM, you don't have that capillary system in that area. It just bypasses that, and it's kind of a jumbled up, tangled up mess of blood vessels that's very, very liable and to rupture and can be quite weak. So I had a pulmonary AVM, which is one of the least common forms of AVM, but AVMs can affect the brain. The brain is the most common location for AVMs to be found. About 18 out of every 100,000 people living in the US, I couldn't find statistics for the UK, but that's in the US, live with a brain AVM, not a brain aneurysm, AVM. You can also have AVMs on the skin, which are a little bit more obvious and easier to diagnose, I'm guessing, although I don't have a skin AVM, in the spine and in other organs and tissues in the body. And my particular type of pulmonary AVM was extremely rare. So I sort of had a triple whammy of rareness to my condition, which meant that growing up, I had never heard of or met anybody else who lived with my condition, and my doctors and medical teams had only treated a handful of people who had the same type of AVM as me. Now, the biggest danger with AVMs and why it's so important to get a diagnosis and to get treatment and be under the care of the right team of doctors and nurses and specialists is that AVMs can cause uncontrolled bleeding and haemorrhages, which is incredibly dangerous, and strokes. Uncontrolled bleeding and haemorrhages is unfortunately what I experienced in my case. So for a lot of people, AVMs aren't picked up or diagnosed until the average age, I think, is like mid-30s. And often they can be found even later into life. Some children are diagnosed with AVMs, and actually half of all strokes in children are thought to have been caused by AVM bleeds. So knowing the signs and symptoms is really important. I was a little unlucky, and I had signs and symptoms quite young. My first experience of living with this AVM was my first lung hemorrhage, which is a kind of mad sentence to say, I realise, at the ripe old age of 9. However, I was misdiagnosed for an additional 4 years. And unfortunately, I then had a very, very dangerous hemorrhage at age 13 that put me in a coma in Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital. And I then got my diagnosis whilst I was there. I should have prefaced this whole thing by saying I am now completely fine, completely healthy. I have a basically symptom-free life, which I know is extremely lucky. I had 3 particular embolizations, is what they're called. They're like one of the treatments for AVMs, which is where they put kind of tiny beads around the AVM to stop the blood going into it, which means it can't bleed because there's no blood in there. But they weren't successful for me, or they were successful temporarily, but not long term. So I made the decision with my medical team to remove most of my right lung after my last hemorrhage 2 years ago, and I am completely healthy. I am so lucky. I live a completely normal life. I have very little symptoms. I'm a voice actor and a singer, and it doesn't affect my work at all. I'm just unbelievably lucky, and I'm incredibly grateful to the team at Hammersmith Hospital for saving my life again. They've done it a few times now, but yeah, they're fantastic. The only things I can't do are scuba dive and jump out of a plane because of the air pressure, but it's a small price to pay, to be honest. And I think the only time you'd probably notice that I had like one less lung, or 2/3 less lung, is if I were to like run a marathon or something, and that was never going to happen anyway. So it's not a huge thing for me. I'm doing really well. There are different symptoms for AVMs depending on where in the body your AVM is, or the AVM is. So for a lot of people with pulmonary AVMs, they can experience shortness of breath, low oxygen. A lot of people have low iron as well with AVMs because of the bleeding. You can also experience kind of coughs, I think. I didn't experience a lot of those. I just was really pale as a child and had like permanently blue lips, which I kind of now looking back realize, oh, it's because I was not getting enough oxygen, but we didn't know at the time. And I apologize for the light change. I live in London and there's like 5 seasons in one day, and that's what's happening outside my window. There are some amazing charities and amazing resources out there, and I will link as many of them as I can possibly find. And the good old NHS, they're fantastic. They have, if you're in the UK, there are some centres of excellence in the UK in different hospitals for treating AVMs and a sort of condition that can cause AVMs called HHT, which is a genetic condition. And I can link those below as well if anybody wants to know. But going to your GP, making sure that if you have symptoms, get them checked out. Don't leave things. Rare diseases are only rare until they happen to you, as I well know. And making sure you get the right medical care is so, I cannot stress it enough, so important. I will link as much information as I possibly can. And if anybody has any questions or wants to know anything about all of this, I can do my absolute best to answer. But if I can't help, I will point you in the right direction of somebody who can. But October is AVM Awareness Month, and if you remember one thing from this whole video, I realise it's like 11 minutes long now, is rare is only rare until it happens to you, and knowing the signs and symptoms could absolutely save your life.